of the Hebrews. And this is why you see this idea coming front and center to so many social platforms. And you have got to understand, especially those of you who are members of the Hebrew Israelites here at Jerusalem, it's your day, and you've been preparing for what's actually being said, what's being projected into the media in terms of who are the Hebrews. And so, see if I can get the screen now. Okay. Hold on. We're going to be working from a document. Can everyone see it?
Okay.
Okay, we'll be working from this document, and this is part one. Also, in addition to the Institute for Regenerative Truth, you all are experiencing a pilot project of an academic institution under the auspices of the IRT called AWARDS. And it's the Academy for Holistic Academics and Regenerative Development Studies. And your subject this evening is it's an introduction to the metaphysical reality and historical significance of the Hebrews. Uriah, I'm going to ask you to be our reader this evening. Is that fine?
Absolutely.
Okay. So you could take it from here. Start with metaphysical.
Understood. Metaphysical. After the physics, the branch of philosophy that studies the fundamental nature of the reality, the first principles of being, identity, and change, space and time, causality, necessity, and possibility. Also see ontology. The branch of metaphysics, knowledge dealing with the nature of being, a set of concepts, categories in a subject area or domain that shows their properties and the relations between them.
Now, this is the big point here, is the ideal of metaphysics. And it's a very broad and in-depth title for a branch of knowledge and study. But in simplicity, it's after the physics, or we could say it gets to it's a study of the very nature and the very principle of being, meaning that it's a deeper look other than the physical ideal of things. And the word ontology is just another branch of metaphysics that not only deals with the nature of being, but it actually shows the property of things as they relate to other things. And that's one of the most important ideas of study, especially when we are defining things in the ideal of the whole. Okay? And that's because it's the relationship between things that defined it. So, even like with human beings, with people, what defines us is our relationship with people. Okay? And so as we study this ideal of the Hebrew, we want to get to the very core, the first principle, the real identity, and even the possibilities of what this ideal can be. Now, there's some terminology here, and in your notes there will be definitions to some of this terminology, so that you'll be able to follow the material better. What you will learn. Continue, please.
What you will learn. Who were the Hebrews of the Hebrew Torah? What is their original and indigenous purpose within the greater humanity? What should be our expectations of the ageless people in the 21st century?
Now, You know, everyone is talking about the Hebrews, who they were, but what should be our expectation of the real Hebrew today? You know, that's very important, because many of you online here, you refer to yourselves as Hebrews. And you see so many different organizations, institutions, etc., that's taking claim, religions are taking claim to this ideal of being Hebrews, okay? But the main point is, what should be our expectation of Hebrews today? Continue, please. Number two.
Okay. Number two, to continually build bridges between diverse ethnic, religious, and socio-cultural communities. Most often, this diversity has been instigated by different and sometimes incongruous understanding regarding the Hebrews as the result religious philosophy teaching.
As a result of religious philosophy and the teachings, okay? See, one of our greatest missions is to bring balance and unity and harmony back to the universe, back to the earth, back to the ecology of people. And so it's this ideal of the Hebrew. When we really get to the ontological, the very essence of this idea, we'll see that this is one of the great expectations of those who refer to themselves as Hebrews. Okay? Because like the note here says, the main three monotheistic religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, claim the birthrights and the inheritances of the ancient Hebrew people. Number three, please.
We will define the Hebrews from, number one, a metaphysical idea. Two, historical facts. Three, a socio-cultural experience. Four, a biblical, how you say that word?
Exegesis.
Exegesis. And five, psycho-intellectual exposition. Each outcome corresponds with the same conclusion. Phenomenal.
Phenomenal. And that's what you'll find when you get to the very essence of the Hebrews, what their historical experience has been. And when you study the socio-cultural experiences of all of the so-called great powers who have been aspirants to rule the world, you find this ideal of the Hebrew. When you do a correct biblical exegesis, the main topic of the Torah is the Hebrews. Yo and the Hebrews is the main topic of the Torah. In the psycho-intellectual exposition, is just, we'll deal with it from the psychological dimensions of the Hebrew consciousness. And each outcome, like we're saying, it corresponds with the same conclusion. It's the greatest and the most impacting and transformative subjects and place of being that anyone can arrive to. Introduction. Bavakasha, please.
Bereshit, the book of Genesis, is the most essential book of the Hebrew Torah. It holds the keys for correctly understanding the foundation and motives of the entire Tanakh, or the Hebrew Bible. Bereshit has been colonized by religious aspirants with hegemonic ambition, misinterpretation, and mistranslation, deliberate as well as unintentional. Challenge us to understand more regarding the primordial meaning of the preliminary book of the Torah.
Okay, hold it right there. Hold it right there. Again, the book of Genesis, Bereshit. In the Hebrew language, it's Bereshit. It means beginnings or in beginnings. It is the most essential book of the Torah. In fact, it's the first 3 chapters that really give us the essential and the fundamental purpose of the entire Torah, those first entire Tanakh, or the entire Torah, those first 3 chapters. When you enter into the 4th chapter of Bereshit, or the Genesis, you're actually entering to what is called the fall. It's the generating idea of how this perfect paradise condition, how it lost its essence, its metaphysical anchoring. And from the 4th chapter all the way to the last prophetic book, you're talking about, or you're studying, how individuals have been trying to get back to Bereshit. That's what the entire episode of the Torah is, the Tanakh and the Torah. The first 3 chapters of Genesis lays out the most fundamental knowledge that gives us our purpose as human beings, as sons and daughters of Yor. Those first 3 chapters. It's given in a very, what we may call it's in symbolic language. It's in allegorical language. And that's the purpose of your teachers, is to move through this material and give you the keys. Okay? Now, misinterpretations and mistranslations, some have been deliberate, some have been unintentional. Either or, they challenge us to understand more regarding the primordial, or the main purpose, the fundamental purpose of this preliminary book of the Torah. Continue on. The indigenous scientific principles.
The indigenous scientific principles and eternal truths inscribed in the Bereshit to be a guide for the regeneration and sustenance of all life on earth have been breached by the theocentric religion. Additionally, and what will be the focus for our subject matter, the human population of Bereshit, introduced as those imaged in the likeness of Yor, have been maliciously re-imaged into a beyond imaginable people and experience.
Okay, hold it right there.
Okay.
Originally, the Bereshit, like I said earlier, it was only a guide. It was a dogma. It was an example for how we are to live in balance and in harmony with the creation. Okay, we'll talk about this more in lesson 2. But Bereshit was breached by theocentric religions. I remember a class that Abba Gadol gave us, Ben Ami, and he shared with us how the intellects of darkness, they had succeeded with supplanting their ideal of God into the Genesis. There's a great difference between God and Yor. These are 2 totally different subjects created by, or we can say spoke to by, totally different people with different visions and different objectives. Yor is not the Hebrew term for God. You know, some people will use the term Yor as if it is the Hebraic name for God. That's not correct. That's incorrect. Because Yor is not a God. We'll talk about that more in lesson 3. But this theocentric religion, that's the great problem with being able to navigate properly through the Genesis and the entire Tanakh. And what they succeeded, their greatest success in their intrusion into the scriptures, into the Genesis, they were able to re-image what was called, or what is referred to as those who were imaged in the likeness of Yah. That's one of the key themes of the Genesis, of Bereshit, those first 3 chapters. It gives us an idea for how we are to understand and comprehend this human populace, those who were defined as being Yah's image on the earth. But as we read it, and as many Bible scholars, how they project that ideal today, it's beyond human reality that 2 people, Adam and Eve, could have populated the entire earth. Okay? Continue, please.
Through an unbiased review and impartial investigation, we intend to identify these misrepresentations and work to redress them. Subsequently, we will collectively gain a more accurate understanding of the Bereshit and restore the holistic ideals inscribed in this text. Ultimately, we aim to bring Bereshit's value and eternal truth back to the forefront of human purpose and progress.
Bereshit was a guideline. It was like a lesson plan, or when architects, when they're creating these magnificent structures, everyone has to work from a blueprint. And this is what Bereshit, the original and indigenous ideal of Bereshit, this is what it does for us. It gives us the blueprint for fulfilling our purpose in creation. Talking about human beings. Okay? But as these theocentric religionists, once they begin to make their incursions into these biblical lands, once they begin to intrude into this deep and profound history, their objectives was to re-image it so that it would be able to serve their homogenic or their hegemonic aspirations. And if you think about it, what's referred to as the Bible lands, from the Nile to the Euphrates, from the rivers of Egypt, the Nile, the blue-white Nile River of Egypt, all the way to the Tigris and Euphrates rivers of Iraq and Iran. That area there has been the prize of all of those that we refer to as the aspirants of world dominion, those who sought to rule the world. They knew that they had to have those lands in their possession, and not just the geographical land itself, but the knowledge systems, the indigenous knowledge systems that were created, that existed in that part of the earth. And again, that's part of what the Bereshit Genesis text, that's what it does. That's what it's designed to do, to create the blueprint that would help men and women navigate properly through this episode that we call life itself. And from it, we gain the most indigenous, primordial, and extraordinary idea of how we are to live and how we are to sustain the planet. Continue, please. The Hebrews.
came. The Hebrew, the people of Breshit have traversed over millennia of demographic, socio-cultural, and imperial transformation and have survived.
Now, the people of Breshit, you probably have not heard scholars, teachers refer to the people of the Genesis. And what I mean by the Genesis, the Breshit, those first 3 chapters, you may not have heard scholars refer to that populace as Hebrews. But that's what we're going to do for you in this lesson. We're going to show you the very beginning of this idea of Hebrew. And that's what we learned with the etymology of this idea. When we study the word through the Hebraic language and through the anthropology and archaeological truths that we have discovered. But the Hebrews have traversed over millennia, thousands of years. They have not always been at the forefront of human progress, but they have always been in existence. Okay? Our task is to understand how the Hebrews have metaphysically influenced and impact on all of these experiences, all of these historical experiences. And this is why we say they have traversed over millennia of demographic, sociocultural, and imperial transformation. All of the great empires, even going back to Mesopotamia and the Sumer Empire, the great Egyptian Empire, the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the Greco-Roman empires, even all the way to the Ottoman and the British empires. The Hebrews have been at the very core of those civilizations. In fact, we built them. Hebrews built those great empires, or so-called great empires. The trouble, the challenge is the loss of correct identity of what and who Hebrews are. And again, the expectation of them. That's the key. Continue, please.
In fact, the Hebrews have influenced the
Conscientious
behavior of human beings from pre-antiquity until our present time.
Right.
When viewed outside the interpretations of religious scholarship, the idea of Hebrew or Hebraism will have a very different reality and significance.
Now, that means that we can only study or research and investigate this ideal of the Hebrew from the biblical scriptures. We have to be able to weigh and measure these ideas of the Hebrew against other sources of knowledge. And this is why we say the ontological concept, a more deeper and a more profound investigation of who the Hebrews are. What are they expected to do? And how they are expected to influence the greater humanities. That's key. And when we do this outside of the strictly religious scholarship, we have a very different understanding of who they are and the significance of their being. Read, please.
When following a correct trajectory of biblical chronology and world history, before there were Israelites, Jews, Christians, or Muslims, there existed the Hebrews.
Okay, that's a good point you all have to remember. When you begin to articulate and define who the Hebrews were, they're not all Israelites. Okay, most people think that you can find the word Hebrew Israelite in the Tanakh, in the Bible. You can't. There is no concept of a quote unquote Hebrew Israelite in the historical context. There are Israelites who were Hebrews, and there were Hebrews who were other than Israelites. Maybe the first time you heard something like that, but the text is here. And you'll understand, that's one of the points you'll understand at the end of this series. Now let's read a brief etymology and historical review of the word Hebrew, please.
Etymologically, the most general accepted hypothesis among most linguist scholars is that outside of the Bible, the definitive origin of the term Hebrew remains uncertain. However, the biblical term for Hebrew, or Ivri, is identified by two meanings. The Hebrews are identified as the descendants of Eber, or Eber, the great-grandson of Shem, son of Noah. The name Eber is associated with the Hebrew root Ivri, meaning crossing over and the beyond.
Okay, right there. That's a good point. This is how you're going to be able to define where the word comes from. Okay, and one of the first, well, first of all, just like we're saying here, when you step outside of scripture, it gets very vague in terms of identifying the Hebrew people. That's one of the problems. Okay, and that's because in its most original and indigenous form, those experiences and occurrences regarding the Hebrews was not documented. And if they were, we don't have access to that documentation. Second, the word Ivri, Ayin Vav Resh, is identified with two meanings. First of all, it's pronounced Eber if you change the vowel sounds. It could be Eber, and the same word, if you change the vowel sounds, could be Ivri. Okay, so Eber and Ivri are synonymous. They're the same, principally, they're the same thing. And so the first reference to this idea of the Hebrew comes from the patriarch named Eber, who was the grandson of Shem, who was the son of Noah. And that's a good point because it places the descendancy of the Hebrews in the Genesis. And this is where we have to pay close attention. The Breshit, it places the most original identity of the Hebrews, the sons or the descendants of Eber, into the Breshit. Let's read that again. Etymologically, the most general accepted hypothesis among most linguist scholars is that outside of the Bible, the definitive origin of the term Hebrew remains uncertain. However, the biblical term for Hebrew, Ivri, and you see it in the Hebrew letters, Ayin Vet Resh, is identified by two meanings. The Hebrews are identified as the descendants of Eber. Okay, that's the same letters as Ivri, Ayin Vav Resh, who was the great grandson of Shem, son of Noah. Continue.
The name Eber is associated with the Hebrew root, meaning crossing over, and the beyond.
That's what the root word ayin, vav, resh. I'm reading what the Hebrew letters are. It's the ayin, the vav, the ayin, the veit, and the resh, excuse me, the ayin, the veit, and the resh. The root word is eber, and it's also ivri, but there's a meaning to it. It means crossing over and the beyond. That's the etymology of that word. It means crossing over and beyond. Read, please.
Considering that other names for descendants of Shem also stand for places, Eber can also be considered the name of an area, perhaps near Assyria.
That's near Assyria, period.
Secondly, and the most accepted biblical root for the word Hebrew is taken from the meaning of Eber's name, those whom had traversed across, or crossed over, or passed over.
Okay, though you're following the concept. Are there any questions at this point, based on what we're reading here, on this brief etymology of this word Hebrew? Are you all following me? This is important. Any questions?
Yep, use the chat, or you can also unmute yourself. Any questions up until this point? Okay. Azariah. Slika?
I said, so far we see that people are following along.
Okay.
Okay. Let's continue.
All right. Although many of the post-Diluvian descendants of Noah can be associated with the Hebrews, it is the prophet Abraham that embellished and embossed the Hebrews into biblical texts. Furthermore, biblical narrative gives a description for Hebrews as being migrants from across the river Euphrates. This notion is shared by some historians and anthropologists who say that the use of the word Hebrew is to refer only to Israelites who were in exceptional and precarious situations, such as wanderers, asylum seekers, or slaves. They reference this from archaeological data found in ancient Sumer or Mesopotamia and Egypt.
Okay, now, so we see two important facts here. Number one, the Hebrew comes from this idea, or the root word, the etymology of the word, meaning those who have traversed or those who have crossed over. Okay? Ivri. It's also Eber, who is one of the descendants of Shem and Noah. Abraham is a descendant, maybe I think it's the 7th generation of Eber. Abraham is the 7th generation of Eber. So we can see how this idea of Ivri is connected to Abraham, because he's a direct descendant of Eber. And Eber's name means one who crossed over, and one from beyond. Okay, now watch how this develops. Now, all of the points that we made about the Hebrew being a wanderer, an asylum seeker, those are some of the definitions that worldly historians will place on the term Ivri. And it makes sense, but we're not going to get into that portion yet. But just hold that in mind. This document will be given to you all as a study guide to continually research, further research, so you can be able to understand this idea of the Hebrew from any epistemology, from any form of knowledge and study. You'll be able to articulate who the Hebrews were, where they come from, what the name means, not only through a descendant bloodline, but as we go on, we're going to give a deeper metaphysical expression and definition as to who the Hebrews were and who they are today. That's going to be key for you. Okay, let's let Aniam read a little bit. You all right?
Okay.
Hallelujah. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom, shalom.
Shalom, shalom.
Which point would we be beginning with? I was just responding to something in the chat.
Number
Okay,
2.
let's start at point 2.
Okay, point 2. According to biblical chronology, all of the biological descendants of Eber can be identified as Hebrews, including the Israelites, Ishmaelites, Edomites, Moabites, Ammonites, Midianites, Amalekites, and the Canaanites.
Now, and that's interesting
Very interesting.
because Hebrews, when you talk about Semitic people, you know, all of the descendants of Eber and Shem and Noah could be descendants of Hebrews, or could align with that Hebrew identity. That's one of the things that the brother Dawson, Robert Dawson, does in encyclopedic matter. I mean, he goes through the whole descendants and the bloodline of Hebrews, connecting them to almost everybody. You see, and hold that in mind, because that's going to be a very, very essential point to know how to articulate. Okay, but all Hebrews are not Israelites, according to the biological descendants of Noah, Shem, Eber, Methuselah, Terah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Okay, read that again, number 2.
According to biblical chronology, all of the biological descendants of Eber can be identified as Hebrews, including Israelites, Ishmaelites, Edomites, Moabites, Ammonites, Midianites, Amalekites, and Canaanites.
Read, please.
If we are to define the Hebrews as descendants of a bloodline or ethnicity, it would have to include all the above families and tribes. A mere cursory study of these peoples would no doubt contradict the indigenous Breshit image and character which we must associate with the Hebrews.
There you go. Now that's going to be a high point. Because if we are identifying the Hebrews as the most indigenous and calibrated human populace, as defined in Breshit as those image in the likeness of Yah, and then we look and see that Edomites, Moabites, and all these other tribes were also Hebrews, that's an interesting point.
Right.
Because some of those tribes will actually contradict
Exactly.
what we define as the most original and indigenous ideal of Hebrew people from Breshit. Now, you may not get that, comprehend that statement now, but before this lesson is over, that's going to be one of your high points for defining and differentiating between these different peoples who claim to be Hebrews.
Right. In other words, just the label of being a Hebrew doesn't necessarily mean that they're righteous.
Exactly. It doesn't mean that they're in the image and likeness of Yah.
Exactly.
Because the bloodline alone, even though it's a significant factor, but the bloodline alone is not the full qualification of being imaged in the likeness of Yah. Read, please. Number 3.
Number 3, if we are to define the Hebrews as descendants of a bloodline or ethnicity, it would have to include all the above families and tribes. A mere cursory study of these people would no doubt contradict the indigenous Breshit image and character which we must associate with the Hebrews. As we will show, point 4,
Continue.
the original Breshit indigenous idea and identity associated with the Hebrews are not restricted to a bloodline, race, ethnicity, tribe, or religious belief. Therefore, neither can the present-day Hebrew phenomena be determined by bloodline, race, ethnicity, tribe, or religious belief. So, what is the Hebrew phenomena?
Okay. It can't be defined or associated strictly with a bloodline. Because if that's the case, then even all of those Europeans who claim to be the descendants, because we know that some of them are from the Edomite tradition and descendants. So do they get the right to be called Hebrews? That's just a question. We'll answer it later. But if it's not a bloodline, if it's not an ethnicity, if it's not a religion, then how did this term become so embossed in scripture as having so much significance and importance that all 3 of the main monotheistic religion claim to be those people? They claim to have the exclusive birthright to the Hebraic inheritance. So what is it? Read, please.
The metaphysical idea
Number
for
5.
the Hebrews, point 5, the metaphysical idea for the Hebrews will render other empowering sources and ontological significance regarding their universal phenomena. This phenomena extends far beyond being biological descendants of Shem and Eber. There are,
Even though those are significant historical facts, we don't want to discard that Shem and Eber were the ancestors of this remarkable people. But that alone, listen to me now, that alone does not give the full character and the metaphysical anchoring of this people. Continue.
this phenomena extends far beyond being biological descendants of Shem and Eber. There are taints of historical experiences which characterize the Semitic bloodline with corruption, idolatry, adultery, incest, and conspiracies. Neither could the fact of crossing over from one geographical location to another be the dominant factor for venerating the Semitic Hebrews as having exclusive birthright to Yah's covenants. In our view, when we connect the Hebrews to their indigenous roots,
Only when,
I'm sorry,
in our view, come on.
in our view, only when we connect the Hebrews to their indigenous roots in Breshit will we rediscover their ontological meaning, significance, and power. We will share this Breshit reference to the Hebrews later in our lessons.
Is everyone following us now? Any questions? We have a point from Kanina. What is she saying? You're right. What is Kanina saying? I just saw a
Okay,
note
she
from
said,
Kanina.
yeah, she said, I was wondering what the stud for. Kanina, can you explain what your question, even if you can take yourself off mute, you can ask the question. If the Edom was a Hebrew, who were the strangers of our fathers knew not. That was Daisy.
I think I can address the comments and the questions that aren't directly pertaining to the subject matter, so we can keep on with the flow.
Let me hear. Let me hear.
She hasn't unmuted herself, but if she has it at any time, you know, when it's time, maybe she could do it.
Is there anyone who's ready to ask a question for some clarity? because this is very important here, this point here,
I got a question.
please.
Shalom, shalom, everyone. I
Shalom.
thought that Abraham was the first Hebrew. I knew about either, but I thought because of the circumcision and the crossing over of the circumcision in my head, I thought that Abraham was the first Hebrew.
Abraham, you could call him Yoakim, the first Hebrew who was called out of Ur of Chaldea on a specific mission to help reestablish the indigenous and correct purpose for Hebrews that was an extension from the Genesis itself. So yes, he was the first in terms of the biblical trajectory that defines a new beginning with Abraham. He's first in that sense. He begins a new process. You know, Abraham is a very extraordinary personality in our biblical history. And this is what we're going to show you as we go on, why he became so significant. Yes, he was a descendant of the Hebrew Eber and Shem and Noah. But as we articulate and define him as an individual Hebrew, you will see why these references will refer to him as the first Hebrew. But that is that's a symbolic idea. It's imaged in another example and an expression for how Abraham performed. But he was not the first Hebrew in terms of the descendant idea. Okay, because remember the name Eber is also Ivri. It's just when you put the different vowels to it, it changes the pronunciation, but the etymology doesn't change. The meaning stays the same. Eber means one who was on the other side, one who crossed over, because that was a common tradition. That name itself was common, like the historians say. There were other descendants of Noah and Shem who were named after places and moving, wandering. Okay, but no, he was not the first in terms of the biological line. He was the first in terms of having this revelation from Yah and beginning an entirely new process that would eventually redefine this ideal of the Hebrew.
Sorry, two quick things. One, if you could move your camera up so they could see your face a little bit more.
Oh, you can see my face and my the words.
Oh, Kane, yeah, Kane. So there you go. That's perfect.
See my, I didn't see my picture. I'm sorry.
It's all good.
Yeah.
And secondly,
okay,
we have another question. Can we take a question at this time?
Please, we have to.
Awesome. Chris, you got it, bro.
All right. Hey, shalom, everybody.
Shalom.
I've been on this walk for a minute, well over 10 years, learning who I am, learning all of this stuff that I've learned, learning all of this that I've learned right now. I want to know, how do we know, as you know, African Americans, who we really are? What group do we belong to, or are we representing the correct thing?
Well, the best data that we followed has been the Torah, you know, the book of Deuteronomy. It's the best we have in terms of connecting the African American back to this history. When you read the curses, what's referred to as the curses that was experienced by the Israelites of that time, and what was prophesied that would come about in their future. No other people can fit those prophetic things like the Africans in the Western Hemisphere. Okay, that's one. But what's your name again, brother? What was your name?
My name is Chris. My name is Chris.
Brother Chris. Brother Chris.
Yes, sir.
See, as we continue with this, you will see that your identity, the fullness of your identity is based on your faith, what you want to be. Okay, and this is one of the things that it's going to be a little new in terms of resolving our identity crisis, especially when we place it in the realm of nationality, race, ethnicity. Because you're right, it's hard for us to follow that kind of trajectory because much of it has been erased. It's been redefined. It's been submerged through conspiracy, religious conspiracies. So the greater portion of it that will seal it will be your faith. And we'll explain a little bit more about that later. To go too much into that now would take us off of the continuity that we're in. But that's a great question.
Understood.
And we
Thank you,
will
sir.
address it. We will address that. Okay, because that's part of the very essence of this lesson is to continually help identify who the Africans are who were taken into the Western Hemisphere during the slave trade. But there are other dimensions to it that even supersedes the bloodline of that when you want to connect back to the Hebraic idea. And I'll just say this. See, there's a difference between Hebrews and Israelites. See, your nationality, according to our research, according to this biblical trajectory, this biblical narrative, our nationality is Israelite. But as we just showed you, all Israelites are not Hebrews. Why can we say that? Because we're defining the Hebrew, and I'm jumping a little ahead right now, but we're defining the Hebrew more as a form of consciousness and conscientiousness. Okay? So we are Hebrew Israelites, first because our nationality, we come from the seed of Abraham through Isaac and Jacob. Jacob becomes Israel. We're Israelites. But the Hebrew, that's associated with our state of consciousness and conscientiousness. Everyone has a right to that. We'll talk about that a little bit more later, but
Yeah.
let's
Thank you, sir.
continue on.
Sweet. So we have Yoel with his hand raised, and we have Sister Geneva want to say something. If she could say something quickly, Brother Yoel, if you could, we'll be briefly and we'll be in question and answers, and we'll save the rest for the Q&A section. But Sister Geneva,
Yeah.
if you could say something briefly, and then we'll go into, and please have your questions ready for the Q&A section.
All right, shalom. So about Brother Chris's question about how we know who we are. In Genesis 15, verse 13, it says, y'all said to Abraham, know for certain that 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there for 400 years. The slaves were brought to America in 1619. In 2019, the pandemic started. That's exactly 400 years later.
Excellent, excellent. I didn't refer to that, but that's in fact, that's one of the first references to our identity. Thank you, Geneva. Perfect.
And I just want to add on briefly that in future sessions, I'm looking forward to having more workshops that will actually cover the historical dynamics surrounding the Israelite diaspora through the continent and into the Western Hemisphere. But we can go deeper into that subject matter than time allows for us to do right now.
Okay. All right, let's continue on. Let's start with 5. Let's do 5 again.
The metaphysical idea for the Hebrews will render other empowering sources and ontological significance regarding their universal phenomena. This phenomena extends far beyond being biological descendants of Shem and Eber. There are
right, because when we began to do a very in-depth study of the actions, behaviors, the experiences that many of these descendants of Shem and Eber have performed, it don't make the ideal of the Hebrew look that phenomenal. I mean, it's right there in scripture.
Right.
And see, this is why a lot of brothers who are not, you know, mainly a lot of the Hamidian brothers who stay out of Kemet, they don't want to accept this biblical reference to being Hebrews as something extraordinary, because they're reading what the Hebrews did. And biologically, those were Hebrews. But in terms of the consciousness, in terms of that identity given to the original man in the Genesis, being imaged in the likeness of Yah. And when we get to the portion of this lesson, when we explain more as to who and how do you identify someone who is in the image of Yah, then you have a better understanding to what a Hebrew is, who they are, and again, our expectation of them. Continue.
There are taints of historical experiences which characterize the Semitic bloodline with corruption, idolatry, adultery, incest, and conspiracies. Neither could the fact of crossing over from one geographical location to another be the dominant factor for venerating the Semitic Hebrews as having exclusive birthrights to Yah's covenants.
Because we're saying that because that's what the word means. In an etymological sense, it means someone who has crossed over. Now imagine when we left America, Aniam,
Okay.
did that flight that crossed us over the Atlantic Ocean and land us in Israel, did that change us and transform us?
If that was true, we wouldn't have needed the Liberia experience. So we needed to be transformed even after we got on the plane.
The point is, changing the geographical location was significant, but it could not be the essence of this people having an inheritance to the bloodline and the great sustenance and the great wealth that's promised to these people. So Abraham coming over out of Ur of Chaldea into Canaan's land, it was significant, but he had to go through something else in order for him to be such an extraordinary individual. Just changing your geographical location is not enough.
People migrate all the time.
All the time. But that's what the word means. It means someone who's crossed over. So people are saying, well, because Abraham was the first one to come out of Ur, he's the first Hebrew, and that's why he's so extraordinary. I don't think so. Because that's not what made us so extraordinary, Yehoiakim. When your parents came over here, it was an extraordinary move that they made coming out of America or coming out of Ur of Chaldea. But where they really made their mark is when they began to transform consciously and conscientiously. That's when they began to become extraordinary people. When they changed their diet, when they changed their attitudes, when they changed their relationships with their children, with their wives, with their spouses, when they changed the ideal of leadership to servitude, when they changed from being an individual in self-gratifying experiences to being holistic and people, ecology. Those are the things that made us significant, not only the trip from America to Israel. So the trip from Ur the Chaldea into Israel, into Canaan's land, as significant as that was. Because just like it was a big thing when we left America, who leaves America in the 60s? That's the promised land. That's the land of wealth and entertainment and sport. Who leaves America? So it was huge when we left America, just like it was huge when Abram left Ur of Chaldea. But it was only when Abraham began to go through this spiritual and conscious transformation that he became an extraordinary individual. And it wasn't because his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was Eber. That's also a definition of a Hebrew. Sons of Eber. Continue, please.
We're on point 6.
Yes.
As previously stated, Hebrews are descendants of Eber, one who stands on the other side, one who has traversed, or one who has crossed over. Abram, later to become Avraham, is a descendant of Eber and considered to be the progenitor of the Hebrew Israelite people. Point 7. In biblical tradition, Yah calls Abraham from Ur of Chaldea, located in southern Mesopotamia.
That's one of the big points. See, this calling out is a revelation. It was just like Ben Ami's calling out. He had a revelation to get out of Babylon, that it was time to reestablish the Bereshit system, the Bereshit ecology in the earth. It was time to establish men and women in their original and primordial image as sons and daughters of the Creator. That was a vision that Abu Ghadol Ben Ami had, and he got up out of her. It was the same thing with Abraham. He was called out by Yah, revelation, to leave. Read, please.
The city of ancient Babylon was at the heart of the Mesopotamian culture. It was the veneration of Babylonian gods that popularized Chaldea and aided the city to become one of the empire's financial centers.
So it was big.
Right.
Because the Babylonian gods were no different than the gods of Apple, the gods of Amazon, the gods of NBA and NFL, you know, the gods of Western education. Babylon, Mesopotamia was the greatest civilization the world had seen. But what prompted Abraham to get out of there? One thing is the veneration of Babylonian gods. Read that again, Anya.
The city in ancient Babylon was at the heart of Mesopotamian culture. It was the veneration of Babylonian gods that popularized Chaldea and aided the city to become one of the empire's financial centers. Notwithstanding, it was the Mesopotamian kings that ruled the then known world. Mesopotamia is one of the central geographical places in the Bereshit narrative. We would have to imagine that Avram's calling out was associated with him wanting to sever himself and his kindred from this God-centric culture.
Yes, you follow me? That's why Abraham wanted to get out of there. He was no different than you who want to get out of America today. But your leaving America is just the beginning of your process. There's a deeper metaphysical anchoring and ontological meaning of crossing over. You know, you're not just crossing over from one geographical location to another, you're crossing over in terms of your conscious awareness. That's the main ideal of crossing over. You don't just cross over because you're Semitic. Once you identify yourself as Semitic, that means you've crossed over. And this is what we need to tell a lot of the Hebrew brethren out there. Just because they have found their identity, their biological identity, does not make you the Hebrew. Not in the metaphysical anchoring, the ontological meaning, the deeper meaning, as you trace it back to its original and primordial place in Bereshit. Hebrews are those who are imaged in the likeness of Yah. And that's holistic. Now, I'm not saying that these brethren, or everyone who desires to be a Hebrew, like you're forbidden because you may not be there now. But know that to be a Hebrew is to cross over consciously from one state, conscientiousness, consciousness to another. To the betterment, to the ascending idea, evolving, getting better and better and better all the time. That's what a Hebrew is. Israelite is different. It's my nationality. And yes, there are cultural, forms and cultural traditions that identify the Israelite, true. But what makes the Israelite phenomena is when he becomes the Hebrew Israelite. In terms of that anchoring in the Bereshit image of Yah. What makes the Ishmaelite the Hebrew is when he's anchored in that image of Yah idea, consciousness. What makes the Edomite a Hebrew is when they are anchored in, saturated, calibrated into that original image of your likeness. Read, please.
Melchizedek, or Melchizedek, the king of Salem. It is Abram's previous engagement with Melchizedek, king of Salem, that his ascension begins.
Now, this is Jehoiakim. We're addressing Jehoiakim now. Now, this is what identifies Abraham in the biblical tradition as the first Hebrew. What we're reading now. But there were other Hebrews before Abraham. But this is the one. It's this experience that embellished and embossed this character, Abraham, into our Hebrew tradition. Read, please.
Melchizedek is one of the most important figures in biblical tradition. To understand Avram and the Hebrew Israelite legacy he would later establish, we should look into Mesopotamia's social milieu and cultural environments that motivated Abram to dissociate himself with that experience.
Now, you can't understand the Hebrew, Abraham, without understanding what was happening in Mesopotamian culture at that time. And what happened? What is this engagement with Melchizedek? Now, Melchizedek, the name means king of righteousness. It means king of righteousness, king of Salem. Now, he had to be a powerful figure to be given the term, the king of righteousness. Okay, now he was a Canaanite, but he was a Hebrew. Why do we say he was a Hebrew? Because of his conscious and conscientious state of being. That's the righteousness. That's the truth literacy, the truth centeredness that was upon this man. One of the most important figures. This is probably one of the first messianic images that we can treat in our biblical narrative history. So take it from Melchizedek is one of the most important figures. Now you can take it from number 9. You can start at number 9.
Okay, can you scroll to the next page? There we go. Melchizedek was both king and priest. In the Hebrew Israelite tradition, he was Messiah. He was revered by Abram, who paid great homage to him through public adoration and by tithing Melchizedek's financial storehouses.
He was Abram's mentor. In other words, he was Abram's teacher. The king of righteousness is who was influencing Abraham. Or at this point, he's just Abram. That's a good point, because we're going to see what we mean by this metaphysical crossing over, because he's Abram now, but he's a student and protege of the King of righteousness. Read.
It is this act of tithing that later establishes the system of tithing from Israelite communities to their priesthood. Although the name Melchizedek only appears briefly in scripture, the king is by far one of the most salient personages in the Hebrew Torah. The verses below narrates the story for how Abram had just returned from rescuing his kidnapped brother's son by defeating a coalition of Mesopotamian kings and later encounters Melchizedek. We're reading from Genesis chapter 14, verses 14 through 20. And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. And he divided himself against them, he and his servants by night, and smote them, and pursued them unto Hobah, which is in the left hand of Damascus. And he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot and his goods, and the women also, and the people. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Kedorlaomer, and of the kings that were with him at the valley of Shaveh, which is the king's dale. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High Yah. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abraham of the Most High Yah, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High, which has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he gave him tithes of all.
Continue.
It is this biblical verse wherein it says, and he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abraham of the Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that Abraham soon ascends to Abraham, or that Abram soon ascends to Abraham, the father of all nations.
Okay. You following it? See, and we're going to break this passage down. So we're going to see how Abraham became the father of all nations. And it's not just this one scripture that fulfills all of the veneration that we give Abraham, is becoming this father of all nations. And again, that was Joachim's point, because from this is where we begin to understand that Abraham was the first Hebrew because of this term Abraham, because he was first Abram. But after his engagement with Melchizedek, the high priest of Yah, he becomes the father of all nations. That's interesting. But let's talk about the scripture, this scriptural reference for a minute. Read, please, number 4.
This biblical reference provides more clarity for Abraham's extraordinary character and his state of consciousness. It should be through this prism that we understand Abraham's anointment as being called out by Yah and father of all nations. Point 1, when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he trained his armed servants.
Now that's from the scripture.
Mm-hmm.
Now, first of all, think about that. When Abram heard of his brother was taken captive, he stood up. He stood up. First of all, he stood up. So you're talking about courage. Courage to serve in the interests of Yah is one of the things that defines you as crossing over. Those of you who have given up a lot of the vanities of that world to come and lay your hands to another higher cause, it takes courage. Then he was well informed. His intelligence was keen because he heard. How did he? Someone was gossiping about it? No, he had connections. He was well informed. He was established, intelligent, smart, but he just didn't grow smart. Studied, paying attention, part of the metaphysics of crossing over. He was wealthy. Other than that, How could he buy arms for 318 men? And he was going up against some of the greatest rebels and forces of that time. So he had strong men with him. And in order to have strong men with you, you have to be what? Strong leader, strong commander yourself. Traits that Abraham was evolving into, because there are things that precedes even this scripture that we're reading, that you can see Abraham being in a process of transformation, of crossing over into his truer Hebraic consciousness. Read, please. Number 2.
Point 2, and he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night, and smote them.
And what does this mean?
It means that Abraham pursued them and he killed them all. In English, you know? Means that he won.
Hey. And I'm sure everybody know that Hebrews are not punks. We're not shy men and women like that. But it's for the cause. The cause, the determination to deliver the victory to y'all.
Yeah, his brother was kidnapped.
Exactly.
You know, by a nation of perverts.
Exactly.
He had to free him.
He wouldn't let him stay there.
Exactly.
Come on.
Point 3, and he brought back all the goods and also brought again his brother Lot and his goods and the women also and the people.
Mm-hmm.
Which means Abram freed this brother's son, took all of their wealth and the people who were with them, brought them back to be slaves.
Mm-hmm. Now these slaves are not the slaves like we were. You know, this is not chattel enslavement. You know, that's something else. We'll talk about that later. I don't want you to think that these men, that the slaves of that time were like slaves of the, you know, that started in the, you know, the 14th, 15th centuries. Come on, read.
Point 4, and the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Kedorlaomer. Note, the author uses the word slaughter.
Mm-hmm.
And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High. Y'all. As Messiah, priest and king, Melchizedek paid homage to Abraham.
You see what I'm saying? See, first back to that term, you know, it says he slaughtered them. You know, that's just a metaphor that gives an idea of what our attitude needs to be when it comes to this evil and this heinous system that we see in front of us. We have to slaughter it, not necessarily the people, but we have to slaughter the system. And how do we do that? By crossing over into a higher ideal of intelligence and consciousness, where self-improvement, our people improvement becomes the greater goal. And I'm talking about virtues of sharing and caring, the virtue of decency and morality, rearing children correctly, loving our wives and loving our husbands correctly. That helps slaughter the system. This is all a part of the crossing over. See, a lot of the things that Abraham did, they're metaphoric to us now. These are just examples. We won't go and slaughter people. Our legacy has been kidnapped. Our identity has been kidnapped and held hostage. Now we have to arm ourselves and go get it back. Come on, sir. And we have to slaughter the system that did it. That's why it was important for the Hebrews to get out of America. We had to leave the lands of the enemy. We had to get up out of Ur, get up out of the strength of the Babylonian gods. And we had to come to a place in Canaan's land so that we can begin the transformation process. So we could become re-imaged and re-anchored in our metaphysical realities, imaged in the likeness of Yah. Continue, please.
And he blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abraham of the Most High Yah, possessor of heaven and earth." This
Now he's saying, blessed be Abraham, and he's saying he's the possessor of heaven and earth. Now, this doesn't mean that he owned the earth and the heavens. It's a metaphor. It's an example. It's an allegory. That he possessed the correct mind, the heaven, the mind, the intellect, the consciousness. He has it now. It was something in Abraham's performance, his action, that he became this first Hebrew and the father of nations. As long as they align with the same principles that Abraham had aligned with. Those are the seed of Abraham. And Melchizedek paid homage to him. He honored this man. And he blessed him and said, he possesses heaven and earth now. But you have to make the connection back to Bereshit. And Abraham reciprocated by tithing Melchizedek. We'll take questions. We'll open it up now for questions.
Okay, so right before we get into that, a couple of different things. So if you're just now joining, of course, we'll be sending out let me make sure I put myself, we'll be sending out the presentation to all those who registered with the link. We'll send this exact presentation out to you so you can have it and study. And then I also wanted to just do a overview of some of just being able to read the comments and also being a student and writing notes myself. I want to do an overview to ensure that we're getting the proper context. And so if anything that I say, and please follow up behind me and to, extract the idea and to be able to explain it in a better way. But we do have lots of questions, etc. Lots of people in the comments chiming in. Aniyam, also feel free to once I go over this to just briefly, to if you want to be able to give an overview, briefly give an overview so that we can open it up so that anybody who has questions and want to dialogue about the specific topic, that you will have the chance to do so just here in a few minutes. So thank you so much, Toda Rabbi, for staying on and sharing this time with us. So, first thing, what is a Hebrew? To get proper understanding based upon this. Again, one who has crossed over, one who has ascended, one who taps into that divine transcendental reality that governs us all. Simultaneously, it's one who is biologically connected to Eber, the great grandson of Noah. But that's less significant. Why? Because without the crossing over consciously, the inheritance will pass us over. We have to cross over consciously or an upgrade. And when you hear this word consciousness, what's been coming to me is the aspect of a programming system. Think of it like a software. And so that software creates a way that it operates. And so that the Hebraic concept in that way is not just limited to bloodline, which a lot of our people get stuck just with the bloodline.
Okay.
Why is this relevant? Right? Why is this relevant to us on this call at this time? Because many of us are in fact descendants, or we like to say ascendants, of this ancient phenomenal people who were charged with a particular purpose to carry out a specific mission. So that's the biological connection that that does have a place. I hope that we're not confusing that it says less or no, not significant at all. And then so in today's time, how does knowing this help us? And that's for a multitude of reasons. For starters, it gives us an identity in order to strengthen a being, but an identity not just rooted in vanity or because we like the color blue, so we named our flag blue, or we colored our flag blue, or we like this name, so we named ourselves this. It gives us an identity rooted in the creator of the universe that then gives us a mission. In Genesis 1 and 28, when it says to be fruitful and multiply, to be is the first aspect because you got to have an identity. And then you do what? You do restore, you do replenish, you do subdue, you do multiply. So that's an important concept, but in order to do that, you got to have the proper identity. The Hebraic concept, consciousness, is the identity that will allow you to do that in today's time. So what are we to be doing now? Those who are solid in their being, that's past the identity phase because it's different phases. We have to be fruitful in our businesses, in our ideas, because what kind of institution will you create with that consciousness? One that's going to restore and replenish the earth. So now you got to figure out, how can I gain influence? The influence that Abraham had, where he was able to galvanize powerful men who was able to stand up for truth in his time. Well, how are you doing that in yours? But if you're not being, you can't do. And if you can't do, you will not have. That's just a universal law. We have to continue to replenish, subdue. Subdue means what? To overcome, to bring under the power, to bring under control of power. Is that not what Abraham did? Because he had intention, and wherever there's intention, there will always be disruption. So what does that mean? That you got to overcome whatever the disruption is. So this passive approach that religion teaches us is not the way of our Father. Our fathers is we promote peace. But in that promotion of peace, we understand that there are adversarial forces. Peace. So we must do whatever it takes to overcome that particular interruption or disruption. And that's honorable. And we have to restore the earth and restore divine law and put everything into its proper order so that we can ultimately have peace, shalom. Because ultimately you want your family to be united. You want your children to be on one accord. You want your brothers, your sisters, your cousins, your nation, your people, and then ultimately the world. But in order to do that, you must possess a consciousness. You can't just do it because you want to. There has to be something that activates the power to restore. So a part of your identity is being militaristic in a sense, but not just because that's what we're trying to do, but it just has to be because there will always be disruption following intention. And we are all beings in a specific purpose, but we all are charged with different missions, and we have a specific mission. And as the Chris asked earlier, well, how do I know if this is really, well, how do I know if this is really us? Well, it's really more of something that, so I said, it's something that you choose. If this message and this mission sounds something that you feel like you called to do, this is something that you can identify with, then get that consciousness, get that programming system, let it activate you so that you can be used by the God of creation to restore the harmony that was once intended in the Genesis, or in Hebrew, Breshit.
Great,
So, Cain.
great. Yeah, I think that's great. Excellent. Aniam, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just want to say that was a powerful presentation, brief presentation from Uriah, commenting on the same principles that you were breaking down, Sar. And I want to like re-articulate a key point that was made inside the chat, because there's a little bit of confusion. And so just to verbalize it, it's that when Sar Kajriel says that there are Israelites that were not Hebrews, he's not denying the fact that all Israelites, according to the Israelite nationality in the Bible, did in fact come through Abraham as Hebrews. What he's doing is he's looking deeper into the meaning of the word Hebrew as a standard for righteousness. And he's saying that all Israelites didn't meet that standard, right? That level of consciousness, that kind of character. So when you receive your document, you go back to the beginning, he mentions 5 different categories that we're going to use to explore the meaning of Hebrew. Bloodline and ethnicity was just one of them. Right, but he also talked about certain things related to your character and your intellect, your heart, and so by saying
Consciousness,
the consciousness, so
conscientiousness,
indeed. So that is the explanation to make so it's not confusing. So that we're saying like there was some alternative bloodline where they were no longer children of Abraham, and this is one of the themes that even came up in the scriptures quite often when the Hebrew prophets might say like that Israel was spiritually like Sodom. You know, you read that in like Isaiah and Ezekiel, they would compare Israel to other nations and say like, you're not even the Hebrews right now. You acting like somebody else. Or even Yeshua, you know, you see the words attributed to Yeshua where the comment is that, you know, we're Abraham's seed. You know, how can we be enslaved? And he talks about how if you're a servant of sin, you're a slave, you know, spiritually, you're not free. You need to be liberated from that. And you're in the image of somebody else. Even though you think you're the biological seed of Abraham, he's mentioning or referring to the idea that there's a spiritual seed, a spiritual identification, apart from just your biological identification. And that's the type of way Sar Kajriel is treating this subject. He's saying, yes, the biological factor is one thing, but the psychological factor is the greater concern throughout the scriptures. And
right, and that's why it's so important. That's why it's so important to start at the Genesis and Breshit, which is going to be our next class. The next class, we're going to go back to Breshit, and we're going to deal with what is called the divine covenants and the divine dispensations. We're not going to go through all of them, but we're just going to highlight the first 4 because they're essential to the lesson, okay? But the key in all of this is those who are imaged in the likeness of Yah. That was the man. Remember, Genesis Breshit gives us an idea of this populace, this people, this humanity that's in the perfect image of our purpose on earth. You know, and that's a very simple and a very comprehensible idea. It's not even complicated. We'll talk about it. And that's, you know, when you talk about the Hebrew, you know, when you talk about Noah, because remember Noah was the father of Eber. I mean, he was the grandfather, great-grandfather, something. As they connect back to what we identify as that original idea and image of man, which is Adam, that's a spirit just as much as a physical person, but it's the spirit that giveth life. It's the character that really giveth life. You know, it's your calibration into the natural ecosystems, the biospheres, living in harmony with these elements is where your real strength and capacity is. And when you define these in the metaphysical idea, these even transform into character. That's what we've been saying all evening. It's a spirit, it's a character, it's a place of peace and integrity. That's another powerful word that we'll go into later. And that's these men who were imaged in Yah's likeness. It was the integrity that they had. And not just the integrity, meaning that they told the truth, but their strength, their capacity was integral in creation. In the creation, they were strong and again, calibrated. And then they were whole, they were holistic, meaning that they saw themselves as a part of every living thing in the universe. And this is why they protected and they sustained all of these ecospheres and systems, because that was the source of their lives. And it was just a regenerating and reciprocating process that kept all things living. These were the metaphysical idea in reality of the Hebrews. But as we see in the physical dynamic, there is a natural posterity. There is a seed, a natural seed. But it's the spirit that giveth life. Okay. Now, it was a point here. You're clear. I think Aniyam and some of the brothers had it cleared it up. I even think you're right, cleared it up about the point that all Israelites are not Hebrews.
Came, but what I wanted to do now, we're in the Q&A. If he wanted to unmute himself and just kind of, if it's still something that we know we need to go through, that he can have the ability to do that. But I want to first, if Sarf is okay, Yoel and then David, and then we can just open it up from there.
Okay.
Shalom, shalom, Saint. Toda Sar for
Yoel, my brother, how you doing?
doing great. Yourself looks great, sound great, and I'm so appreciative of your works. This is just knowledge that's great food. I just wanted, and I hope I can put this question together. It's in regards to where we are right now, especially in the world, and even discussion right now. And I see it's going to happen as to, you know, this Hebrew anti-Semitic situation here. And you start off by saying something about what we should look at is what should be expected of the Hebrew. Now, I go back to when Abraham was called out, and we're in the line of the lineage of where we get from just the physicality, the DNA of Abraham and who's Hebrew is to understand it's all about the metaphysical, it's about the consciousness, that type of situation, understanding that. But I go back to from the sons of Noah, it was the lineage that led to Abraham, Shem and Shem, that seemed to Abraham came, which was called out. And then this ability to be challenged with the metaphysical aspect of it to develop the consciousness to go forward. So my question is the DNA of Shem, DNA of Am, a precursor that the calling out would have been? Or is there, would you say that there's a precursor for us to be called out based on we have that identity, we have that DNA in us to be called out again, to be the ones that lead, as opposed to, let's say we put it into Japhet, which why bring it to where we are right now. Would it have been, or could have been, or would you comment that they could have been called out? How would you, if I put that question together, how would you respond to that?
Well, you know, the DNA, it's a factor, but again, it's not the main factor. Even today, you know, neuroscience has shown us that DNA does not have the last word over gene regeneration. You know, it's you're familiar with the term epigenetics?
Epigenetics, yes. Okay.
Yeah, it means that your thoughts can actually override the science of DNA. You know, you can actually change the DNA through your thinking process. So back to consciousness. Consciousness is the key to all transformation, to all growth. You know, it's the mind and the usage, the proper usage of the mind and the physical body. It's all the same. So I would say it's it's really no different than what I've been saying. Yes, DNA is a part of identifying this source, but it's the consciousness. It's the thought. Remember, we are our thoughts. You know, not just your physical body, your L. What really defines your L is how your L thinks. You know, and the way your L thinks is what's going to develop your L's relationship with all other things. And that's who you are. That's really who you are. You know, the body is one thing. Yeah, we can see your L's body, like we can see the natural posterity. But if they are really going to be the men and women imaged in y'all's likeness, if your L is going to be imaged in y'all's likeness, it's going to be defined by how your L thinks and how he processes and applies his thoughts. So the action and the thoughts and the thinking and the consciousness and the holistic state of your being, it can override DNA. It can create new genes that the natural DNA cycle and system may say it can't produce. Because I think what the whole DNA science was before this epigenetics and neuroplasticity, before it actually emerged in neuroscience, they were saying that DNA was everything. And it's almost the same, Yoel, with scientific materialism. You know, there's a field of science that says matter, atoms and matter is all that matters. That might be where the term comes from. You know, all that matters is matter. But then once, you know, this whole ideal of quantum physics, once it actually emerges, and this whole process of being able to look deeper into the subatomic world, they see that it's consciousness that creates the matter. And consciousness is an action, not just, it's the mind, how the mind processes and how the mind thinks. So again, it's back to what we've been saying. The Hebrew, if we're connecting the Hebrew to any type of significance as an extension from the Genesis or the Bereshit ideal of those created in the image and likeness of Yah, then the DNA it could very well be secondary.
So in a sense, that's the confirmation that there's really no excuse for us not to basically cross over. We just have to maintain our alignment to get this information. Yeah, so that mindset that we have developed in the New Babylon and New Captivity, which we give so much strength and significance to, that even probably governs some of our fear. We got to realize to let go.
Yeah, and let me say this is a matter of diplomacy and statesmanship. Now, you wouldn't see an Israelite brother and just say, well, you're not a Hebrew. You know, you're an Israelite, you're not a Hebrew. You know, because the possibility of him coming into this consciousness, it's yeah, it's there. It's there. So it just sets the precedent. It sets the vision for all people. Everyone should want to become a Hebrew. You know, and that's why the next lesson is going to be really important when we deal with the covenants and the dispensations. I think it'll give us some more scriptural reference to make this point a little clearer when we talk about the Hebrew and the metaphysics of it as being anchored in consciousness and conscientiousness.
Toda. So we have a couple of questions. So what I want to do is, we can keep our questions at least maybe to up to 2 minutes at most, just to be respectful of everybody's time. Ali, did you have something that you wanted to contribute? If you can hear me, you can take your microphone off mute.
Yes, I just wanted to know about what we ever gonna like speak on like the second Exodus.
You hear
The
that, Sar?
second Exodus,
Mhm.
what is he referring to? You're right when he says second Exodus.
Talking about us leaving America.
Oh, yeah, that's gonna
Wait.
be part of
Let me
the last.
let me clarify.
Mhm.
Akali, is that what you're talking about?
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. The people that's in America that's supposed to be, leaving, coming back to Israel.
Okay.
Oh yeah, because that's part of that's inclusive of the ideal of crossing over, and it's not to say that you can't make the crossing over without coming out of America. You can, but when you get to the expectation of the Hebrew Israelites, see, that's where your nationality comes in. As an Israelite, you should want to participate in rebuilding your national heritage, and that's in Israel. So yeah, we will talk about that, my brother, for sure.
Torah. All right, quick, great, quickly. Dr. David, you got it. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom, Sar, Brother Yorai. Sar, excellent presentation. I noticed that when you made the comment of Yah is not God, I felt I felt a few people shake a little bit. What I want to do, if I may, Sar, and going into that Hebrew, Yah is a proper noun. Yah is a proper noun. It's a name. So you wouldn't say the Most High Yah, because you're actually thinking in that religious perspective of that expression, that vernacular that we would use when we would say the Most High God. Again, Yah is not God. He's more than that. God is a religious invention. Yah is Yah. So you would not say Most High Yah. In scripture, it doesn't say Most High Yah. It may say Most High God, but in Hebrew, it would say Yahweh. And even in other expressions, when we say thank, with the other expressions that we use, we have to be careful that we're not relating that Yah to a God. Okay.
Right.
Or so it's a title. The God, the El is a title.
Yeah, you can say
And
El, but
yeah.
there's a difference between, again, when you talk about Yah, that's his name.
Absolutely. We're on the same accord. I'm just saying the El part, or the Most High El, because it do say the Most High El in Hebrew. So that's the title. So he said, I'm the God, like I'm the highest of all the gods.
Well, what we're gonna do right there, brethren, that's part of this lesson, is differentiating between Yah and God. And that's gonna take a minute. So we can save all of our questions and comments. And I will invite Dr. David to Ben Navid to come back and give us some more of the Hebraic definition of these terms. One of the things that was always interesting to me is that when the vision came to Moses, the revelation came because he was asking, when I approached the Pharaoh, who should I say sent me? How can I explain this? And the revelation didn't come Yah, it didn't come Elohim, it came Ehyeh Asher et Ehyeh. I will be what I will be. I am that I am. And we're going to talk about that, because that's not a God. It's not, and we're going to trace the ideal of God. We're going to go into the etymology of the term God, and you will see you would never use that term again, not especially when referring to Yah. Yah, like Doctor said, Yah is Yah. Yah is not the great God. He's not the almighty God. No, you can't even associate the term. And then think about this. We got it right when we differentiated between Jesus and Yeshua. We knew that there's not even a way you could say the term Jesus in the first century. You couldn't, because there was no J. And then when you get more to the etymology of that word Jesus, you see it has nothing to do with anything Hebraic. It's totally Greek. Okay, but this is the point. Where did Jesus come from? What system, what's the ontological root and nature of Jesus the Christ? What's the epistemology of Jesus the Christ? When you search it back, it comes from God. He's the Son of God. But Yeshua couldn't be the Son of God, because remember, they're two totally different people and experiences. Yeshua came from the your idea. So that's gonna be a good one for us. And we have to take our time with that, because that's another key to understanding this whole Hebraic mission. Hebrews can't worship God. They have to align and calibrate and live in harmony and balance with your two different experiences.
So if I may, and just very quickly, when we go into that about Yeshua, remember Yeshua's, when he began his ministry or his service, his first declaration was to repent. And repent means to change your thinking or change your consciousness.
Yeah,
in other
good
words,
point.
and his parables were talking about another type of consciousness. All those parables were talking about another, to ascend to another level of consciousness.
And
so
and
that's
that's
going
so
to be,
key.
we're going to tie that in. Right.
But you know what? And what's so beautiful about what you said, Doctor, is that that's the theme of the Genesis. Is to change your thinking.
Right.
When you get it, when you come out of the theological expressions that were superimposed in it, it's all about transformation.
It's all about
conscious evolution.
Quickly, Slika, quickly, and then we'll go to Yoezer, and then I believe it's Amen. So really quickly, this is very important, and I don't want, anybody who may be listening to this conversation, it may seem a little high level, and it could seem a little confusing, because dealing with languages, that was a part of the conspiracy to divide that consciousness from us, is by changing the language. Language is not how what we use to communicate, but it's also the window in which we see the world. So language gives you perception. And so if you don't have a certain language, you can't have a certain perception. So if we're dealing with the Hebrew, we have to deal with the language that the Hebrew spoke, so that we can have the right perception and perspective, so that we can do the right thing. So this is very important. So hang in there. Don't get confused or go beyond right where you may be, but stay right there, because it is very important. I had a friend who was one of my good friends. He was Haitian, but because of even his language barrier with English, so I'm trying to explain certain things in a Hebraic perspective and in an English language, was another foreign language to him, and he couldn't quite get it. But it was just until a couple of weeks ago, he was like, man, everything you were trying to teach me, I understand it now, because he learned it through experience, but through language was the barrier. So don't get confused, with the particular aspect of language, but language is important, and it's not just translations or transliteration, because word sound power has a physiological, your body, your physiology, and your biological effect. So it's imperative that we get the language correct and that we speak properly, so that we can get the benefits biologically and physiologically and neurologically, because it has an effect on every cell when you hear certain words. That's why we have to be very important when we're speaking in the terms of language. Ak, your way is there. Ak, your way, there you go.
Shalom, shalom, family.
Shalom, my brother.
Shalom, shalom, Star. It's good to see you. I just wanted to say, more of a comment than a question, real quick. I really like the character assessment that was given in this lesson about Father Abraham, our father Abraham, and it follows a conversation I had a couple of weeks ago where I was just pontificating to one of my brothers about our great grandfather Yehuda, and that a lot of our brothers, our Israelite brothers, have this like warriors kind of bloodlusty view of our grandfather Yehuda, when from what is presented about the character that we know of him, I don't know how they got to looking at him like that. I understand that he was a mighty warrior, but I think that we have used this old character assessment that came from somewhere to mean that we have to be mean to people. And and similar to the character assessment that you just gave of Abraham, I would really like to see an expansion in a character profile extrapolated from scriptures of the true character of these men and women.
That's a great point.
That was really powerful from Abraham, because the Hellenistic viewpoint of all of our great fathers is that they were softer and weaker, but the brother that you just described is neither of those things. This is a warrior case. And who really was autonomous. This was a person who moved his kingdom from place to place outside of these other kingdoms and was a force to be reckoned with and negotiated with by the surrounding kings. Speaking of Abraham, in his nomadic lifestyle of just picking up and moving his whole situation from one place to another, that took a level of logistical mastery that's very uncommon in anyone. So this is a high-ranking genius, really. And so to hear the character assessment given here in this lesson, it just, I would like to see, and to help really to add on to the character assessments of these other great figures from scripture. Even that point that you made about him giving tithe to Melchizedek, I've never heard that before. And a part of my, I'm always interested in learning about Father Abraham, because a part of my upbringing, I was born Islamic. And so I have two sides of the Abrahamic story in my mind, and I like to merge them into the character of who our great forefather was. So just giving
great
thanks
point
for that, and then
Remember,
want to see that expansion.
Yeah, that's a great point. I like that. I love that. I love your attention to that particular point. And remember, in the beginning, we said that once we get this Hebraic thing straight, there won't be a lot of the division between these so-called religious affiliations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a mission that my father and I have talked about since we came into the nation in the year 2000 was, there's a clear divide amongst, and I'm in Atlanta right now with Atlanta Muslims, and it's like there's this divide that's completely unnecessary.
Yeah, part of
unnecessary.
One of the things that I do here in Israel, as Uriah had mentioned, we have a nonprofit organization called MEDOC. And our focus has been, learning more, integrating more with the Ishmaelite Hebrews, or the Hebrew Ishmaelites. I mean, we give it that identity because the Ishmael was also a son of Abraham. In fact, when you talk about the land covenant that was given to the seed of Abraham, it also includes Ishmael. The Jews knew it. That's why in 1948, they couldn't refuse a part of this land being given over to the Ishmaelite people. However, it was, the whole Arab and the Palestinian identity confuses the Ishmaelite, people today. But still, it was very correct, because this land, it's not just deeded over to strictly the Israelite people, So this is, I'm telling you, brothers and sisters, this lesson here, it makes you universal in your scope, and it gives you the leverage to actually make peace with this whole, confusing, genealogy and this, the descendants of the first man, Adam, it gets very confusing, and it's been deliberately made confused, because people profit from war. When you think of the greatest wars ever fought on the planet, it's been over religion. My God is the real God. My God is the true God. I am the true people of this God. That's what all the wars. Hitler was at war with Germany because he was the Third Reich. The First Reich was Charlemagne. The Second Reich was Otto von Bismarck. And the Third Reich was Adolf Hitler. All three of them men believed that the blood of David and Jesus ran through their blood, and that the British and the French had capitulated. They had capitulated and surrendered that ethnicity to a lower grade. And he felt responsible for bringing the pure ideal of God back to the earth. That's what the whole German war, that was his whole war against his own brethren, and it goes on and on and on. It's about my God is better than your God. But when you go back to the Bereshit idea and the original covenant made with the people of that experience, it's peace. And peace is the greatest state of existence anyone can live in. Peace is not passivity. It's just like we were explaining about Abraham. Peace is a place of pure strength. Everything that you all have achieved in your lives has been because you were confident, you were assured, you were inspired. That you can only reach the ultimate level of those attributes when you're at peace. And it doesn't mean that you don't have enemies. You always have enemies. But, and let me just say this one thing, and now we'll move on. When you talk about spiritual war, the greatest enemy is yourself. And so when you make peace with yourself, that's when you're really in power. Because you don't live anymore in contradictions. Toda.
Toda, sorry, great explanation. Amen.
Hey, shalom, shalom. And it's Oman.
Oman. Shalom, shalom, Oman.
Hey, Oman, Mashalomka, how you doing?
Hey, Mr. Yan, sir, I'm all the way up, sir. At all
Always
times.
in the house.
Hey, look, I'm all the way up all the time. I was working this whole time, so I had to jump in and out on a phone call and stuff like that, but that's gonna be part of my question. First, shalom to you, sir. Shalom to Dr. David, shalom to Aniam, and shalom to all the brothers. Y'all high forever. My question, sir, I've been wanting to be in an IRT class. I've done School of the Prophets here in the DC jurisdiction, and and things like that. But however, I wanted to be in a direct IRT class like with you, or with whatever classes you got going on, because until I can get home and go to School of Prophets, but how can I do that? That's my first question. I only got two questions.
This is your first step right here, because this is IRT.
Right.
And one of the things that I'm going to explain to Uriah as we continue on, see, all of you who attend these 3 seminars, you're going to receive a certificate of completion, and that could be used later as what we call a transfer of credit. I mean, you'll get points, academic points for attending this series, and that will work towards a degree and some type of other certification from the IRT. So really, you're in it right now. Uriah just didn't, have the information on his desk when he opened up, but before the series is over, that is a part of it. Everyone that's on here, if you complete it, you receive a certificate of completion. It's not a degree from the School of the Prophets or the IRT, but it's just certifying that you studied with the curriculum of the institute, and you'll get credit for that.
Okay. Now, when we was in the State of the World, y'all talked about the new Voices and Visions for Peace. I believe I sent my email over. I pray I did. I think I did.
We have it.
Okay. And are we setting up something for like I guess I don't know, a body of brothers with that?
Well, not the new Voices and Visions of Peace. It's a little different than the academic study and curriculum from IRT, but we have your address. And what we do with the new Voices and Visions for Peace, Aman, we make sure that you're involved in all of our events. For example, we have the Writers' Conference coming up on the 1st of the first month, and you'll be invited. You'll be sent if you're going to attend online, you'll be given all of the information to attend. And so we just keep you, abreast on all these events. You understand?
Say that. My last thing was just if now with the transcription of not the transcription, but more so the recording of this, will that be available? And second, if I could offer my services, I ain't gonna say I'm technically savvy like that, but I can figure out how to record a session and get it over to brothers and sisters, in a timely fashion. I feel that that's an area that is a need in that area, so that we can all, have these things to go back on and study. If I can offer whatever, I'd be of service to you, to the IRT to record and do that if somebody would instruct me so to do.
Okay, well, right now, you're right. You can assist your right, because if I'm correct, you're right. This is 3 courses that we're doing, and this is only part 1 of the first 3-part series. Is that correct?
Okay. So, Akoman, make sure that you signed up on the registration page, and let me know what name you signed up under, and then therefore we'll be able to get in contact, and I'll direct you into some places on how we can serve and continue to serve to go higher and higher. Toda Rabah for your and the recording. As far as the recording, yes, I'll be sending out a link to the recording for all those who signed up on the registration page. Toda Rabah.
Beseda, you're right. You on the CFF group chat on the WhatsApp?
I should be. It's a couple of different ones, but I'm in one of them. Okay.
All right, Beseda, I find you.
All right, Toda.
All right, Toda.
Go ahead. It's good to see you.
Yo, hi.
Aniyam, you got it. Up.
Okay, shalom. I just want to make a quick point relative to the subject of DNA, is that when Moses led the Exodus out of ancient Egypt, there wasn't any DNA testing station set up on the border to determine who was and was not an Israelite. It was the population that followed was called a mixed multitude, which lets us know there could have been Egyptians, Cushites, Libyans, a variety of different ethnic groups could have been present at the time. What formed the people of Israel into one body through what's called ethnogenesis, when a bunch of different people become one entity, was the covenant that was made. And through the covenant that was made, they all agree to follow the same constitution and the same code of values and ethics and have the same worldview. And through that sharing of consciousness, they became a new people and were able to organize themselves accordingly. But there wasn't any DNA testing stations set up at that time. And just as a point of reference, we could think like the Zulu kingdom in South Africa was expanded by Shaka Zulu, and people who were not a part of that specific bloodline became Zulu from that point forward. That new kingdom incorporated people to be a body. That's what incorporate means, to create a body that wasn't there before. Same thing with the United States of America. 600 years ago, there was no such thing as an American. You had Dutch people, French people, British people, English people. You didn't have any Americans. Now there's a bunch of Americans. Their bloodlines go back to a variety of different nations. Chinese Americans, Indian Americans. What's making them American is their commitment to this American idea. This democracy, this liberal, this human rights, this, all the different frameworks that they have, committing to following the Constitution, to the point where when you come to America and you want citizenship, there's a process you go through which indicates that you are an American. You get absorbed, they have absorption centers. And so the nation of Israel, the kingdom of Israel, has a constitution, a code of conduct, a worldview, some standards that need to be aligned with. And people from all kinds of different backgrounds, according to the Torah, would decide of their own free will that they want to participate in that experience to build that nation. They could have come from another background, right? But by aligning with this idea of Hebraic consciousness and culture through the Torah, they able to join in on that covenant. When the scripture says strangers will join in with them. And so that's a big part of where Sarah is saying it's not even about the bloodline, because people from various backgrounds, you could be a Kemetic Hebrew, you could be a Syrian, but you'd be like, man, this way, the prophet Jeremiah said we would look, that the Gentiles would look and say, we've inherited lies. We've inherited false traditions, we've inherited things wherein there is no prophet, and they would want to pursue the truth. And so it's not, you're not an Israelite. Sorry, buddy, you can't ascend, you can't evolve, you can't cross over. Well, that's just not true. That's not even biblical. And so that idea of that spiritual transition and the forming of a new people, that's exactly what we initiated with the coming of the kingdom. We established that standard, and now you can actually be a Hebrew and cross over into this new realm and learn the ways of Yah, because they're being disseminated from Jerusalem, as the prophecy said.
So, Aniam, so that same description that you just gave, wouldn't that also apply if we were to imagine that in Bereshit, as we began this whole trajectory of this perfect image of man and woman, couldn't that also be your choice?
What do you mean? The choice to become in the image of Yah?
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be a decision to align or to subordinate yourself to that standard.
It's a choice. You know why I asked you that question? Because part of the substructure of life and success and greatness and phenomena is based on faith, right? Because back to the whole ideal of what you can conceive, you can achieve, the power of the mind and how it's the transforming thing that when I said earlier that science figured out that consciousness creates the matter. Why am I saying that? Because the ideal of faith in Hebrew is emunah. And I would advise everyone to read Abba Gadol's book, Everlasting Life. And I think it's the first part of the book, and he breaks down the word faith. And it's maybe about 10 definitions that come from the same root word. Okay, but what's interesting is one of the last terms that determines your faith is le'omanut. I think I'm saying that right. Le'omanut.
Le'umanut.
And it means, pardon me?
Le'umanut.
Le'umanut, yeah. And it means nationality.
Yes.
That's the last term that faith brings you to, is your identity. And that's exactly what Aniam just explained. Even in the United Nations, it's a creed, because remember, these men who were creating these universal laws and human rights, they were drawing from these ancient ideas and concepts. That's where Aristotle and Socrates, the men who they give credit for bringing about these international and universal dimensions of human rights. And these men understood that it was everyone's choice to your nationality. And that's why it's part of the creed of the United Nations. And that's what Aniam was explaining, that you can become a citizen of any country.
Right.
If you are willing to adhere to
their consciousness,
their rules and regulations.
And that's not and what I'm saying is that's not a man-made law. That's the law of eternal. The universe.
and that's why the terminology, the kingdom of Yah, is so significant. It has to be an idea of something, no matter where you come from, you can join the kingdom of Yah. There's no bloodline that prevents you from being a part of Yah's kingdom, because that's what we were all in the beginning. And then we created our own human kingdoms, and that's where all the problems come from. So what we're doing is going back to the time before all those things even existed and just aligning with the original idea.
And that's, remember I said, that's the point of this lesson, is to take you all to the most ontological beginning and the essence of this concept of Hebrew. And you know what you do? You'll be the master of the subject, because you see, even the European brethren who created the Jewish religion. Now we understand, if we begin to talk about historical facts, that they might not be on point with some things. But in terms of them claiming heritage and inheritance into this idea, they have the right to do it. But there's a constitution for it. There's a criteria for it. You know, and if they fall short of that, they can't claim it. Just like us. You know, yes, I can trace my DNA back to the indigenous people of this land, the Israelites. It's possible. By faith, I believe it. However, I must meet the criteria of the Hebrew Israelite experience in order for me to expect any of the inheritance of that, you know, that experience.
So
that was a great point, Aniam. To that.
Hallelujah.
I may start that original idea of the law of return was based on the idea of being a Hebrew.
There you go. There you go, Ben. I was going to say that, but that's a great point. Remember, that's a good point, because when Nasi Keskiyahu and Nasi Gabriel, when those first families arrived in Israel, they got citizenship by making a vow that they would live according to Torah. That's all they had to do. They didn't have to prove themselves to be a Jew.
Right. And then the government said you got to prove about bloodline with your Jewish mother. So they
that was later.
Yeah, they did it afterwards. So they descended into the idea of the bloodline factor away from the original eternal idea of following Torah.
Exactly.
But that's another reason why. With this new government that's coming in, their objective is to change it again, make it even more strict to become a part of this idea that they call Israel, the state of Israel and everything. So that's why these conversations that are being this dialogue that's going on with the Irving situation, Kyrie Irving and Kanye. This is no coincidence. This is no coincidence. That's this conversation, this idea has to come out to the forefront, and we'll work it out. We'll bring it back around to that universal idea of Hebrew, but it has to come out. It has to be talked about.
It's a process. It's a transformation process.
Let's take a start.
Right. Anyone else?
Would you say that Hebrewism, as we're discussing, identity, faith, that's almost like a definition for a culture that we have to be or have? Would you say that's almost like it's culture? Because if culture is the thing that we protect and the thing that protects us.
You can say that, Joel. That's why we've always said that our way of life is not religious, it's a culture. It's a way of life. So that's relative, absolutely.
Yeah, religious just hits on a surface level, but a culture, it matriculates through every fabric of everything, your whole being, the way you sing, the way you live, the way you eat, the way you think, right? What's appropriate? How do you connect with your mother, your father? You know, which then creates a certain result. Everything that we do creates a certain result. So when somebody says, well, this is another religion, it's actually offensive, because religion don't even hit the surface of what a culture is. It's much deeper than the culture and much more and much more, I wouldn't say complicated, but much more intrinsic,
Holistic.
holistic.
Yeah, and you would have to go further into defining the type of, or what defines the culture, because actually, Yoel, I mean, you're right. Religion is a culture also, you know, but where they get it wrong with religion is the teachings and the ordinances. You know, they're not aligned with what we call truth literacy. You know, they're based on, you know, I think I would call it it's relative religion, or it's just they make the religions relative to what they're.
You call it relative righteousness.
Yeah, there you go.
Righteousness relative to whatever you believe in.
Exactly, and whatever your ambitions are. You know, whereas that the culture that we're speaking about, this alignment, this calibration, it's part of the universal order of all things. You know, it's aligned with the material and immaterial laws of the universe. Those can't be changed. Men didn't design that system, where men designed religious systems. You see what I'm saying? See, the Bereshit system is not a religion because men didn't create it. It's part of the Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. It's part of the holistic science of Yor. And it's all one incorporated system.
You know, so
and we are a part of that system. And that's our culture.
I'd like
You know,
to add
not,
in real quick.
Yeah, please.
Shalom, shalom. Aka Haron ben Kima.
Hey, Aaron, help us out.
What you're basically talking about, I've read in the book, it's called cosmic habit force. You know, the sun sets at a certain time every single day. The stars are in perfect placement every single time, every single season. It's like what Ben Ami said, we have to follow the laws, seasons, and cycles. And it goes deeper than just physical matter. You know, it's the spiritual cosmic matter that keeps everything in alignment, how our heart beats at a certain pace by itself. Wow. Those are the universal cosmic habit forces that we must align with to unleash this level of consciousness that is global and at our disposal, so that we can have infinite possibilities with our thoughts. It starts there because our consciousness is what directs the universe. It's full of energy and vibration, but the consciousness, which is connected to the cosmic habit force, is what brings these things into reality. So you can see the physical form or the physical reality. Like how I said, we started in the minerals of the soil, right? We know that we don't see these minerals, but our physical bodies are actually made up of these minerals. Then from an agriculturalist perspective, you study the minerals that are actually in the soil, and those minerals are in our body. Then from an astrologer's perspective, you study the matter that's in the universe, and these are same matters and minerals that are in the soil and in our bodies. That's the cosmic habit force. That's that universal culture that you're talking about. And I just read about it with Akia Halalel, and it's called cosmic habit force. Regardless of if it's positive or negative, it's just there always.
Now, do you know what you just explained, my brother, young son? You just explained Yor. That's part of how you explain and define Yor. That's not a God that you just explained. That's the Ehyeh Asher et Ehyeh idea that was given to Moses. And that's what he was trying to bring people into alignment with when he created his Mosaic law. What you just described is part of that Ehyeh Asher et Ehyeh system. It's not a religion. It's a calibration. It's an alignment. It's a being. It's a becoming. You become that. You know, that was powerful. I'd like for you to put the name of that book in the chat. And I think that's something that everybody should want to get a copy of and look into. If it's talking about what you just explained, that's good. Are you all familiar with a book called the Quantum Warrior?
Yeah, I
Come
brought it.
on. Come on. That's what I was referencing.
Okay. Yeah, that'll help us make the transition from God to Yah. And see, and what make ours so even extraordinary beyond what a lot of those men have been able to write, and that's we're developing a people ecology that's trying to achieve those things. We're not individuals on an individual quest or journey. We're trying to build a holistic system of government that's based on what Aaron, what Aaron just explained. That was a great point, Aaron. Toda. Great contribution.
Aaron, if you could put that in the book. Oh, you sent it to me, Aaron. If you could put it for everybody. Toda. Okay.
See, we got Asaf in the house. He came a little late, but he's here.
It's good to see him.
Yes. So,
see you, brother.
Shalom, sir. Shalom, my king. Akwata.
Shalom,
yeah,
shalom,
I got in a little behind, but that's all right.
Yes. Okay, awesome. So in closing, we'll take one more question to close out. The recording will be sent out to everybody who registered. Not if you just got the link. If you just got the link to the Zoom and you didn't register pre-hand, then the recording will not go to you. So it's imperative if you go back up into the chat, I put the link to register. Therefore, I can send out the recording directly to you. Okay. And then lastly, yep.
You're right.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but on that point, they received the recording and the document. Correct?
And the document. Okay. The recording and the document.
And
so go ahead, Anya.
No, finish your point.
Yep. So no, go ahead. If you got an interjection real quick, we good.
Well, I was just going to say, it's also worth noting for those who like to continue learning, we do hold School of the Prophets every Yom Revi'i evening at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm one of the main instructors, and we're currently having a God, the Black Man and Truth study group. So we're going through the Abba's First Writing, GBT, on a week-to-week basis. I created a study guide, which segments the chapters into a series of questions so we can take our time and matriculate through an understanding of these Hebraic principles. So we can send out through the link that Uriah has, link to School of the Prophets for those who like to be able to participate in some more virtual classes on a weekly basis.
Perfect. Now, Yoazer is saying, is it Kamashi or is it Revi or Wednesday or Thursday? Because
I apologize. Yom Revi is absorption. Good call. Yom Kamashi is
okay. Thursday. Yes. All right. Sweet. All right, perfect. Okay, we'll send that out as well, Toda, for that. And do we have any last questions? One last question we'll take. And be sure next week, 3 o'clock, same time, Eastern time, 10 p.m. Israel, 10 p.m. South African time.
Okay, and one last, I have a question that I'm getting in my chat. The same link that people registered for the first time, they'd be able to get access to the next class through if they registered one time, or would they have to register?
Yes, no, they don't have to register again. Okay,
and so also people who haven't registered yet, if they register eventually, would they be able to get access to this first recording?
It's not impossible. It's not impossible.
Maybe they register, is there a way they can send a message to request it or something?
If they request it, correct.
Okay,
if they
perfect.
request it, it'll be sent to them. Absolutely.
Just making sure.
So, okay, perfect. And also a couple of quick announcements as well. This is very important that we continue these classes and we grow this. So if you could consider to make sure that you please donate to the link that I have in the chat. Okay, and all of the contributions goes to the Institution of Regenerative Truth. we can keep furthering this message, because this is the message that will liberate us, and we want to continue to pass this message onward and upward. So, Toda, for everybody joining on, do we have any last questions as we're closing out, and any announcements from you, Sar, that you may want to announce as well as we are closing it out?
He's in the zone. I think we'll take that as a no.
Nah. Sorry, you got anything?
No, I'm good.
All right. Okay. Awesome. So now I don't know if Zoom took this away, because I've been on some other Zooms where it was malfunctioning. But if you want to save the chat, you should be able to. I don't know how it looks necessarily on I don't know how it necessarily looks on a phone, but on mine, on the computer, there's going to be 3 dots where it allows you to save the chat. Check and see if you can do that, because saving the chat will be very important so that you can go back and reference. Okay. And Catherine asks, what's up, Catherine? Catherine asks if Aharon, the cosmic habit force, was that a concept in the book of Quantum Warrior?
Cosmic habit force was one of the last universal principles in Think Your Way to Wealth. And
Think Your Way to Wealth.
That was the second book. And talking about how our consciousness directs energy, that's the Quantum Warrior, and explains how to harness that energy.
Okay, awesome. So Catherine, you got that? Those 2 books, Quantum Warrior by John Kehoe, and then Think Your Way to Wealth by Napoleon Hill. Sweet. All right, I think we're good. All right.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Is Yehoiakim, are you still on? Oh, there you go. Can you close us out? Sorry, you good, right?
Oh yeah, right, sure. Hey, let me just shout out to a sister of mine. I just saw her on. That's Yeshiba, Coach Yeshiba, woman of valor out of the UK.
Top scholar.
Shalom, Yeshiba.
Yeah. Can you unmute?
Shalom, shalom, sir.
Hey, my sister, how are you?
Hey, awesome, sir. I had to jump on to get fed to the next level. You know, you're just going higher and higher.
Okay. Let's talk before the week is out, please. I'd love to talk to you. Okay.
Listen, I told her the subject is very timely. I've been following it and wanting more to enrich in case I make any comments.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm sure when you do, it's going to be a great contribution. Thank you.
Hallelujah.
Good. Yes, ma'am.
Taught by the best.
Awesome. Okay, sweet. So I'm saving this chat now. We'll have any follow-ups that we need to do within the chat. But other than that, I think this was a great first lesson. Thank you for taking the time to come out and to share this time and space with us. And I hope that, again, that this information is not just information, but it's something that invokes transformation so that we can become. And then which then gives us the ability to do so that we can have what was promised to us. So hallelujah. And
hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Aki Hoyakin, if you want to close us out, we greatly appreciate it.
All right, let us all bow our heads and humble our spirits once more, please. יפואה, אין עמך לעזור, בן רב ואין כוח, עזרנו, יפואה אלוהינו, כי עליך נשענו. יא יפואה, תודה רבה, שאתה נותן לבניך, ילדיך, לדון בנושא ההיסטוריה שלנו, לחקור עמוק עמוק, ולהגיע לבסיס, לאמת, להבנה, ולבנות את ביתך מחדש. Oh yeah, Yah of the heavens, we thank you for allowing us to gather here to research and get a clarity on our history, which will ultimately make us clear on our destiny. We thank you for the wisdom of those present on the call and for those who are seeking to get more knowledge and understanding. תשובה יפה, רבבות אלפי ישראל. Hallelujah.
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 Ya Chai.
Yo.
Yokai.
Ya Chai.
Yokai.
Ya Chai.
Yokai.
וקיים בקרבנו ובכל מעשינו. סלע.
Selah.
Hallelujah. Okay, Torah.
Lato Mishlacha.
Shalom, shalom. Lalato.
טוב.
Hey, I see
Toroba.
myself. Yeah, I see.
Shalom.
That's why we